Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandria Russell, and I am the postdoctoral fellow for the Scarlet and Black Project here at Rutgers University. Welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome you back for day 2 of our virtual symposium. All of our Zoom webinar sessions will be recorded, and we have closed captioning and a live transcript available at the bottom of your screen. Please let us know where you are joining us from in the chat. I'm still coming to you live from Highland Park, New Jersey, and it was great to see so many people yesterday join us from all over New Jersey and the nation. Remember to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box. Both are available at the bottom of your screen. We are looking forward to another lively discussion, and you'll have the opportunity to unmute your mic and ask your questions directly to our panel. We are also proud to announce that we have started the Scarlet and Black Project Book Fund to support diverse students throughout Rutgers University. We will be placing more information about how you can donate in our chat. So before we begin our program today, a community project, Scarlet and Black in New Brunswick, I would like to introduce our project co-chair and co-editor to all 3 volumes, Associate Professor of History and Women and Gender Studies, Dr. Marisa Fuentes, for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome to the second day of the Scarlet and Black Symposium. I am Marisa Fuentes, a professor in history and women's gender and sexuality studies here at Rutgers, and one of the co-directors and co-editors of the 3-volume series on the history of slavery, race, dispossession, and social justice activism in Rutgers history. It is important to begin by acknowledging the land on which Rutgers stands as part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. I want to pay respect to Lenni Lenape people's past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. We are excited to continue the conversation started yesterday that celebrated the research and publication of Volume 2 and the forerunner generation of Rutgers' first Black students. The panels also highlighted the images used in the books and digital archives drawn from our very own Rutgers University archives and libraries. We were incredibly fortunate to have President Jonathan Holloway deliver a powerful keynote that spoke to the longue durée of the fight for freedom in which African Americans engaged and still engage in this country, reminding us that the history of discrimination, exclusion, and oftentimes brutality is not just past, but present. But as President Holloway reminds us, we can choose to be hopeful. Indeed, as the volumes show, the first Black and Brown students at Rutgers carried this hope in their activism that insisted the university make space for all of us to be here. Today, we illuminate the community partnerships this project has generated and depended upon, and the people who fought to expand the Rutgers community in significant ways. From the beginning in Volume 1, we sought to place Rutgers within the urban spaces that it occupied. Each volume devotes a chapter to New Brunswick's development alongside the university and the people who lived, organized, built families, and enduring institutions there. Rutgers students also put themselves and their educations on the line to make the Rutgers community accountable to students of color, the neighborhoods from which they came, and to the people whose homes were at risk from university expansion. Today's panels highlight the labor, demands, activism, and hope of students and community members in New Brunswick, Newark, and Camden, a hope we all benefit from today. The Scarlet and Black Project has grown from these books into digital projects, inclusive campus tours, historical markers, and community partnerships. And we will have a new iteration of the project in the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice, launched by President Holloway. A project of this scope and duration was simply not a solo venture. Indeed, the range, longevity, and rigor of these 3 volumes would simply not have been possible without the hands, help, generosity, and sweat from a large community of people. We depended on the generosity of colleagues in our departments like Professor Camilla Townsend, who authored the first chapter in Volume 1 entitled Intersecting Histories of Rutgers University and the Lenape People. We were so lucky that early on, that people enthusiastically offered their help and support for this work, including the Rutgers Library archivists, especially Erica Gorder, and former university archivist Tom Frusciano. Professor of Theology John Coakley at the seminary kindly read and commented on drafts of the first volume. Professor White and I were both blown away by the commitment and scholarly excellence from graduate students in the history department and also sociology and the School of Education. These students conducted the archival research and drafted the essays in each volume. Many of them stayed on the project for the entire 5 years, balancing their own coursework and degree requirements with this project. Please take the time to get to know them and their names as authors in all of the volumes. For the final 2 books, we hired amazingly organized postdoctoral research associates who directed the research and kept things running smoothly. A shout out to Dr. Kendra Boyd, Dr. Maya Carey, and to our current postdoc, Dr. Alexandria Russell, who did some heavy lifting putting this symposium together. Dr. Jesse Baker's technological and scholarly talents are unsurpassed. We thank him for all his work all over this big project and for just making sure I knew where to show up today. There are many, many people to thank, and I hope we did some of that work in the book's acknowledgments. We want to, of course, thank the university administration who provided the support to complete the 3 books and the several other projects in 5 years. We extend our gratitude to former Chancellor Richard Edwards, Executive Vice Chancellor Felicia McGinty, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Administration Karen Stubis, Executive Dean Peter March, and Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice and former Humanities Dean Michelle Stevens. Finally, thank you to the people, the students, the activists, Camden, New Brunswick, Newark community members, the student forerunners, including Islay Walden, who walked from North Carolina to New Brunswick via DC after slavery, seeking an education at the seminary, for making it possible for all of us to be part of the Rutgers community. And we are proud to walk in your path. Thank you and enjoy the second day of the symposium.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those wonderful remarks, Dr. Fuentes. Now I'd like to introduce the chair of our panel today, Pamela Walker. Pamela Nicole Walker will graduate this May from Rutgers University, New Brunswick, with a PhD in African American History and Women and Gender History. Congrats. Her dissertation examines the relationship between motherhood, race, activism, benevolence, and political consciousness in the 1960s era social movement networks. Pamela has contributed articles in the 3 volumes of the award-winning Scarlet and Black Project. Her work has been funded by the American Philosophical Society, the PEO Sisterhood, and the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. In the fall of 2021, Pamela will join the History Department of Texas A&M University, San Antonio, as an assistant professor of African American history. Welcome to you, Professor Walker.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Alexandria. And welcome everyone who's here in the audience today. I'm so excited about this panel. You know, in preparation for this symposium, we've been encouraged to think about this panel as a celebration and a culmination of many years of work. This work of bringing 3 volumes of Scarlet and Black, the volumes and the digital archive to the public was not only done in the university, but has been done in partnership with the greater New Brunswick community. And so this panel is a reflection of that, and it's a celebration comprised of community members, graduate students, and professors. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and at this time, I'm going to introduce the members of our panel. So we have Ms. Barbara Saunders. She has served as a volunteer coordinator of the Alice Jennings Archibald Library since 2015. The library is housed at Mount Zion AME Church in New Brunswick. Ms. Saunders has been a member of Mount Zion AME for 45 years. In addition to working in the Archibald Library, she serves as the musician for St. Paul AME Church in Bound Brook, New Jersey. Her educational background includes a BS degree in business education from Delaware State College, now Delaware State University. And she has an MS degree in guidance and school counseling from Queens College, CUNY. She began her career in education in 1961 at Charlotte High School in Rochester, New York, and retired from Dewey High School in Brooklyn, New York in 1998. Next, we have Dr. Kristen Obrasil Kaufman. She's an assistant teaching professor and coordinator of the public history program in the history department at Rutgers University. She researches poverty, labor, mobility, crime, and punishment in the early American Northeast, as well as public historical and commemorative work on these subjects. She coordinated, along with student and community collaborators, the Scarlet and Black Project's historical walking tours, the mobile app, and has been engaged in the effort to develop related historical markers on campus and in New Brunswick. And we also have Brennan Sutter joining us today. She's a doctoral candidate in history at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She specializes in American gender and sexuality. Her dissertation researches the intersecting construction of sexuality and construction of sexual and consumer identities among marginalized persons in the second half of the 20th century. She is currently the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Predoctoral Fellow in Women's History at the New York Historical Society. We've all prepared short opening statements regarding our work and our contribution to the Scarlet and Black Project. We'll go in the order of introduction. I'll get us started, and then we'll have Ms. Saunders, followed by Dr. Obrasil Kaufman, and Bren give brief opening statements. So I started participating in this project. I've been a part of the project since Volume 1 in 2016. Since that time, my participation in subsequent volumes has been around researching and exploring the experiences of Black people and marginalized communities in New Brunswick, folks who lived in the shadow of Old Queens. In the first volume, I researched the African Association of New Brunswick. This organization was founded in 1817, and I argue that it was one of the first Black autonomous spaces in New Brunswick. There were no Black churches in New Brunswick at this time, so Black people were attending integrated churches like First Presbyterian Church in downtown New Brunswick. And so the association existed throughout the mid-1820s and was a crucial site for Black community development. Blacks gathered together to discuss abolition, colonization, and they raised funds for African schools across the state. During this period of gradual abolition, enslaved and free Black people gathered together, usually in the homes of free Blacks, to have these conversations. And often, the enslaved people in the New Brunswick community received permission to attend from slave owners. John Nielsen, slave owner and trustee of New Brunswick, or of Queens College, he wrote a permission slip for the enslaved woman Phyllis to attend and join the African Association. My work on the African Association of New Brunswick put me on the path to thinking about Black autonomous institutions in New Brunswick and how African Americans claim space in the city. I discovered that the African Association disbanded right around the time that Mount Zion AME Church was founded in 1827, and its foundation was laid in 1829 on Division Street. So for volume 2, I explored the history of Mount Zion AME Church, the longest running Black institution in New Brunswick, and a kind of central space for community formation, Black community formation in the city. This was an opportunity for me to learn about Black leadership in the city, like Reverend Solomon Hill and Alice Jennings Archibald, who was the first Black woman to graduate from Rutgers with an MA in education. Besides an oral history interview that the Rutgers Oral History Archive conducted with Miss Archibald and a few other materials, I had to go beyond the university to get this history of the AME Church. I went to the New Brunswick Free Public Library and received enormous help from Kimberly Adams. And then in 2017, with some nudging from John Coakley over at the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, I reached out to Mount Zion AME Church directly. After meeting with the then pastors, the Phillips team, I was granted access to the history room, where I discovered hundreds of documents telling the history of the church. Some of these documents almost 200 years old. This research and telling the story of the church's early years, learning about Miss Archibald, conducting interviews with church members, work that I've been conducting over the past 4 years that has contributed to volumes 2 and 3, would not have been possible without the leadership and guidance of the Archibald Library coordinator, Miss Barbara Saunders. She was in the library with me every day during this time. She was my teammate, guiding me through these sources, filling gaps in the narrative of the stories that I was hoping to tell in the volumes. And during this period of research, there was a transition in pastoral leadership to Reverends Golden and Maddie Carmen. And Miss Barbara set up meetings for me to build relationships with the new pastors and to continue the work and working in partnership with them for preservation and preservation of the materials in the library. In 2019, I presented the idea to Miss Barbara and the Reverends about digitizing some of the materials at the church for the public and providing archival grade boxes and folders for processing and housing of their precious materials. With a team from Rutgers, including Dr. Russell, Beatrice Adams, and myself, along with Miss Barbara. We never planned to remove these objects from the Archibald Library. They're at home in Mount Zion AME Church. It was always the goal to partner and extend university resources to this community institution and this staple in the Black community and assist in the preservation of their materials so that they would last forever. And so now there are 2 ways besides volumes 2 and 3 for the public to engage in the narrative of Mount Zion AME. And now they can engage with the primary sources. Right now they can visit the Archibald collection on the Scarlet and Black website to learn about Reverend Solomon Hill and church conventions and the Willing Workers Club and some of the earliest members of the church. And the second way, perhaps, in the not so distant future, when the world opens back up, the public will be able to go to Mount Zion AME Church, see the new historical marker in the front, and visit the Archibald History Room to conduct research about Black churches and Black institutions in New Jersey. And so with that, I'll pass it to Miss Barbara, who can share a little bit about her experience as a community member partnering with the Scarlet and Black Project.
I am unmuted. Thank God. My experience with the project has been a wonderful learning experience for me. It was really, really great to meet with Pamela. And actually, she gives me way more credit than I deserve. All I did for her in her research was open the door, because I hold the key to the Alice Archibald History Room. And she came in and was very, very helpful and extremely professional, going through our archives. And I tried to stay out of her way and still learn what she was doing so I could be of some assistance to her. My involvement in the history room started in, I guess, 2017, 2015, I think. And but before that, I had been a member of Mount Zion for so many years. But I was involved in other activities, and I knew about the library, but I did not spend a lot of time there. I knew about Mrs. Archibald, and well, let me back up. I knew about Mrs. Archibald, and I did learn that Paul Robeson, when he was in college at Rutgers, lived with a family from Mount Zion Church. And that's pretty much what I knew. I was, as Pamela mentioned, I am a musician at another church in Bound Brook, but I was involved with the music department in Mount Zion and other activities. So I knew it was there, but was not really interested a whole lot in it until Pastor Phillips asked me to go into the room and see what I could do. And I did. And I had to have a committee, because when I got there, I discovered that the library was really a museum, and the contents had stopped after they got the initial library set up. Then the other items were coming in, because our history was still our history, and every day is a new addition to the history. And we found boxes of materials that had not been handled, because they had been there was no one that when we were not continuing to keep our history alive. Actually, it was all in boxes, and we changed the okay, stop. We changed the displays, because we found that many of the articles were starting to decay because they were out, and we put the older things away. And it was really a great experience working with Pamela. And then she had had Alexandria come in and help us, and the digitization of the archives was really very, very special for us, because apparently that we have been working to try to do that, but my poor committee did not really know how to do that. Did I answer your question, Pamela?
Yes, ma'am, you did. And so now I'm going to transition for our next opening statement to discuss more work that's been done in New Brunswick with Dr. Kristen Obrasil Kaufman.
And I did it again.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you so much, Saunders, for all of the work that you've been doing.
That was awesome.
So I arrived at Rutgers the same semester that the first volume of Scarlet and Black was released. So as a public historian and someone closely involved in community history before arriving in New Brunswick, I learned everything about the university and New Brunswick through the lens of this project. It really became the formative way that I saw the university and the city and their relationship with each other. It became a conversation starter when I spoke with practitioners at the dozens of historic sites and agencies across the state who I worked with as part of our public history program, placing undergraduate students in organizations that are designed to be mediators and conduits for local and community histories of New Jersey, who had the perception of their historical landscape in New Brunswick and across the region really as being almost invisible, especially for people who have been marginalized and disenfranchised. And Black history in particular, I had many people tell me that there simply wasn't much to know. And clearly the brilliant researchers on this project have demonstrated how untrue that is, and what a vibrant history of resilience and resistance and relationships and relationship building that there is to share. And so I saw my role as community history advocate in New Brunswick to share the work that the project team had put together, to share the volume, and the fact that we were able to promote, a free ebook through JSTOR, that the University Press made that possible, really shaped how I was able to try to pursue relationships with community organizations. So I tried to find as many opportunities as possible to ask questions and collectively define answers with community members, seeking opportunities for co-creation of knowledge about histories of dispossession and social justice advocacy. I wanted to ask community members what the research of Scarlet and Black means to them, and what New Brunswick's history and New Brunswick's African American history means to them, what the university means to them. And so in order to do that, I pursued as many opportunities to collaborate and sit down and talk with community members, largely through some relationships through the New Brunswick Free Public Library and the New Brunswick African American Heritage Committee, in order to create exhibits, oral history projects, to document, preserve, and share New Brunswick's African American history, developed historical walking tours, and a mobile app featuring the research from the first volume, which we'll share more about later on. But I want to just highlight how central this collaborative process has been in shaping the perception of the incredible research that the Scarlet and Black team has put together over all of these volumes. It's a really beautiful example of collective knowledge creation and horizontal knowledge exchange of community members and university members learning alongside each other about the space that we share, that there is not an invisible landscape that we all walk on when we walk across campus. That history is present. And so we try to develop as many opportunities as possible to really point to that through the walking tours and the other projects that I'll share more about in a little bit later in our conversation this morning. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. And now I'm going to invite Brennan Sutter to share a little bit about her work researching the KKK in New Jersey.
Thank you so much, Pam. And I just want to also quickly take a moment to thank everyone who has made today's event possible. Scarlet and Black has been a collaborative project since day one, so it's just really exciting to see it all come together and just see how many people feel passionate about the work that we've done and the stories that we have to tell. So thank you to the organizers, but also thank you to the audience for being here. It's really an affirmation of our work. So I first came to Scarlet and Black as a PhD student in the Rutgers History Department. Like Dr. Walker, I was in the first group of students who were invited to do research on the project. So this was very early on, before anyone really even knew the full scope and the influence that Scarlet and Black would eventually achieve. And honestly, initially I was surprised to have been included on the project at all. Initially, the first phase of the research focused on the colonial period to the mid-19th century. And my own research focuses on gender and a much later period, the 20th century. But the research team really encouraged me to bring my skills as a gender historian to the project. So even though this was an earlier period for me, I approached the research like any gender historian would, examining the intersections of identity for the Black residents of New Brunswick. Asking questions about how race intersects with gender, class, and sexuality to create these everyday lived experiences. And actually, as I would come to find out, for much of its early history, New Brunswick's Black residents were disproportionately female. So I actually think that an eye for gender analysis was really very useful for the project. But ultimately, I researched and helped write chapters in both Scarlet and Black Volume 1 and Volume 2, both of which focus not so much on Rutgers, but more broadly on the experience of African American life in New Brunswick. In Volume 1, I looked at the period from, I believe, 1866 to 1835, and I attempted to show how the statuses of free and enslaved in New Brunswick actually carried really an incredible amount of slippage. Those who were enslaved could still practice moments of freedom or even run away and secure years of freedom. But at the same time, we also see that a Black person who was legally free was still subjected to New Brunswick's oppressive laws for Black residents. And they could be very easily captured, incarcerated, and if they could not prove their free status, they could even be sold back into slavery. For Volume 2, which picks up where Volume 1 left off and goes to about 1945, I examined what was really truly a very vibrant Black institutional culture that developed in New Brunswick around the early 20th century. There were Black social clubs, mutual aid societies, political organizations, fraternal organizations, temperance organizations, in addition to church organizations. And I looked really deeply at the Rice Industrial Colored School, which under a female principal taught Black children trade-based skills alongside the sort of traditional academic disciplines for over 2 decades. But at the same time, I juxtaposed the rise of these Black institutions with the rise of the KKK, which was quite active in New Brunswick from the early 1920s through the early 1930s. So after working on the Scarlet and Black books, I was invited to contribute to the Scarlet and Black Digital Archive, which is a website that I highly encourage everyone to check out. It is a beautiful and intuitively designed site. Shout out Jessie. It shows many of the primary sources that we use for the project, but it also contains fully developed digital exhibits. So just like any exhibit that you would see in a museum, the digital exhibits on the site feature sources that we uncovered and situates them within just a comprehensive historical narrative. So I created 2 different exhibits for the digital archive, one that tells that history of the KKK in New Brunswick, and one that also looks at the NAACP in New Brunswick, and specifically their efforts to protect a Black man who fled to New Brunswick from Georgia in 1923 out of a fear of being lynched. And these stories, I think, actually sit side by side very interestingly because the KKK first appeared in New Brunswick in 1923, and this anti-lynching activism that the NAACP fought so hard for was also in 1923. So you have these 2 moments occurring simultaneously. But yeah, so between my work on the Scarlet and Black books and the digital archive, I've just really tried to show, the constant tension between autonomy and constraint that Black New Brunswickers encountered in their everyday lives.
Thank you so much, Bryn. So in a moment, we're going to begin our discussion among the panelists, and we'll also be opening it up to the audience. So feel free to drop your questions that you have in the Q&A box or in the chat. Before we go there first, this is the community panel project. And so I want to invite Professors Annette Freitag and Julia Ritter to tell us about a community program that's coming up in the fall.
Thank you, Dr. Walker, and thank you, Dr. Russell, and all the members of the Scarlet and Black Project for allowing us this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Julia Ritter, Professor of Dance at Mason Grove School of the Arts. My colleague, Annette, I will allow her to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Annette Freitag, Professor for Landscape Architecture at SCBS. I'm very honored to be here.
So Annette and I are founders of the Arts Integration Research Collaborative, otherwise known as the AIR Collaborative, which prioritizes creative placemaking to foster multidisciplinary research to benefit and strengthen the Rutgers New Brunswick campus and surrounding communities. And we are deeply grateful to Dr. Henry Turner, Associate Vice Chancellor for Research in the Humanities and Arts, for his encouragement to create this collaborative with Dr. Nicole Fleetwood from SAS. The AIR Collaborative has expanded in wonderful ways to include co-principal investigators from 5 schools: the Blaustein School, Mason Grove School of the Arts, the School of Arts and Sciences, the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, the School of Engineering, as well as collaborators from the Rutgers Libraries. And one of our collaborators is on this panel, Dr. Kristen Obrasil Kaufman, whose expertise around local histories at Rutgers, including Native and Black histories, and integrating histories of mobility is critical to the AIR Collaborative's first project, which we are calling the March to Rutgers Gardens. So next slide, please. So the March to Rutgers Gardens is currently planned for September 25th, 2021, and it serves as a call to action for the city of New Brunswick and Rutgers to invest in a designated path that will bring individuals from the center of Cook campus to the Rutgers Gardens. And it calls for the construction of an ADA accessible pedestrian bicycle bridge over Riders Lane. It is scheduled to coincide with World Car Free Awareness Day, which is September 22nd. And the march is free and open to the public of all ages and abilities. We will note that given the uncertainties around COVID, we are in communication with the appropriate members of the Rutgers community who are overseeing the protocols so that we can host this event safely and responsibly in compliance with all university guidelines. So for the march, participants will join a choreographed mile-long walk from the Woodlawn Mansion to the Gardens. And along the march and the walk, participants, i.e. marchers, will witness live performances of dance, music, storytelling, and learn from guest and faculty speakers about the many layers of history held by the land Rutgers occupies, while also gaining awareness of the need for safe access to nature for all members of our community. For those of you that may not be familiar with the Rutgers Gardens, it features over 180 acres of designed gardens, a farmer's market, and natural habitats. It's one of the few gardens in the region that is open 365 days a year with free admission. It's a precious resource, but it's cut off from the university and surrounding communities because it's encircled by 3 highways and accessible only by car. So this inaccessibility of the Rutgers Gardens brings to light concerns about diversity, equity, inclusion for historically excluded groups, including people of lower socioeconomic status and those with disabilities. So while hosting this wide array of botanical and natural treasures, the gardens are a reminder of the white privileging of the outdoors, which is part of a legacy of historical injustice in America. If made more accessible, more people from the region could regularly enjoy the gardens and the many health benefits that they offer. Next slide. So this just gives you a quick outline of what will happen along the march. We're going to have a choreographed land acknowledgement performed by Dr. Alessandra Williams, who is a member of the dance department and also a diversity advocate with the Rutgers New Brunswick Division of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. We will have an acknowledgement of the Scarlet and Black Project, particularly the historical marker at the Woodlawn Mansion. We will then welcome Girl Trek representatives. Girl Trek is the largest public health nonprofit for African American women and girls in the United States, and we are very grateful to Dr. Jacqueline Litt, Dean of Douglas Residential College, for partnering with us to host Girl Trek, and there will be students from Douglas Residential College marching on behalf of Girl Trek that day. We will have remarks by Dr. Laura Lawson, Interim Executive Dean of the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, along with Dr. Freitag, about what it means to design just landscapes. We will then move to the Round Barn on the campus farm, on Cook Farm, and meet Dr. Donna Gustafson and Erica Gordon to talk about the history of the avant-garde art movement known as Fluxus in New Brunswick. We will then move to the Cow Tunnel, where Dr. Scott Orway will present a new composition that will be performed by the Rutgers Voorhees Choir and directed by Dr. Brandon Williams. We'll have a movement choir that honors the agricultural laborers who have worked on this land that Rutgers occupies for centuries. We'll also have storytelling for sustainability, equity, and inclusion offered by members of the Mason Gross Theater Department. Then we will stop at a site where we will look at a proposed site for the pedestrian bicycle bridge. Dr. Nenad Gakinski, who is the chair of civil engineering, is going to be working with students in their 4th year to design proposals for that bridge as their capstone project. Finally, we will cross Riders Lane with the help of RUPD, and the Rutgers Marching Band will welcome us with a fanfare. From there, participants will be able to explore the gardens, or they can hop on a bus that we will provide that will take them to the Zimmerli Museum, where they can witness the Angela Davis Seize the Time exhibit. Next slide. So please join us. We have many, many collaborators who are working with us, too many to thank here. We invite all of you to march with us. We also invite your participation in the preparations for the march, which will begin in May and continue through early September. If you have any questions, please contact us. And please also visit us on Instagram at the AIR Collaborative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ritter and Dr. Freitag. That sounds like a really exciting event for the community to be involved in. And so at this time, I'm going to start with our roundtable discussion. I see that we have some questions coming into the Q&A box, but I'm going to start first with a question for Dr. Kristen Obrasil Kaufman about some of the initiatives of the public history aspect. Can you talk a little bit about that and say more about how the New Brunswick community has been engaged in the co-creation of some of these themes?
Thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to give you some visuals. So hopefully you can all see that. When I first started having conversations with community members and representatives from organizations like the New Brunswick African American Heritage Committee, what I heard was we need opportunities to not only learn this history that many of us don't know, because at the time that most people living in New Brunswick who were part of this community went through school, there was very little African American history taught, and even very little local history taught. And additionally, opportunities for conversation to talk about the ongoing legacies of the material that was unearthed in the Scarlet and Black Project. So one of the first things that we did was to develop a relationship with the New Brunswick Free Public Library and Kim Adams, the archivist, and the archives there, and members of the New Brunswick African American Heritage Committee, including Joyce Browning and Marilyn Herod and Lauren Carrington, to curate an exhibit, which they chose the focus of, and really drew on existing research from Scarlet and Black and making connections to people's contemporary experiences and late 20th century experiences as well. So undergraduate students from the public history program and we had a series of meetings and conversations with members of those committees to identify primary sources and themes to put together a fairly low-tech exhibit that we hoped would foreground opportunities for people to read the interpretation of undergraduate students thinking about this 19th and 18th century material in the 21st century, as well as to come to their own conclusions and then share that collectively. And so we had a series of speakers talking about this material and about the legacies of slavery that are still felt in New Brunswick in the present, and how that has evolved and changed over time. So I'm just showing some photos from those events and some from those exhibits. And what came out of those events and that partnership was a need for cross-generational conversations, in particular about Black history, because there have been so many different layers and levels and types of experience that people have had with Black history in New Brunswick, and just with living in New Brunswick, and how the demographic shifts within the communities have shaped people's understandings and relationships with local history. And so the next step was to try to find a way to bring some of those resources together in one place to make them a little bit more accessible for everyone, especially for teachers. Some of our undergraduate public history interns, including Rakaya Totten, who was a senior at the time, worked with some teachers from the New Brunswick Public Schools to develop some lesson plans and curricular material, which also contributed in part to the creation of this resource. And I'll share the link for this in the chat, along with some other materials, which I will talk about in just a moment. But part of this was bringing the primary source material together for people who may not be quite as eager to sit down and read the beautiful tome of this research. So there's images, primary source material, a lot of the stuff that is now in the Scarlet and Black Digital Archive, but this was before Dr. Baker was so wonderfully able to put all of that together. We tried to start out with some of this material here. And this led also to a community history day that we held in 2018, which Dr. Walker helped with as well, conducting oral histories, to do a series of interviews with community members, drop-in oral histories for anyone who wanted to show up and chat with us, which was a way of trying to kind of capture this sort of vernacular expertise within the community outside of more kind of prescribed environments in which people can often feel uncomfortable sharing some of their experiences. So that's been part of that documentation process that I hope contributes to some of the other work that's happening with the AME Church, which we'll hear more about in a moment. One of the biggest accomplishments that we were able to pursue with undergraduates in particular from the public history program was a series of historical walking tours, which we began in fall 2017, and which there was such great demand for that we ended up continuing up until I think the last one was given in January of 2020, right before COVID, where we worked with a team of undergraduate and graduate students to synthesize the research from the first volume of Scarlet and Black and try to render it accessible in a way, not that it's not accessible, but in a way that could translate to conversations within the campus space, to be able to point out markers on the landscape of literally and figuratively that help us interrogate the relationships between power and land ownership and race and gender and class that the project is focused on. So undergraduate students have up until 2020 conducted tours of the campus for more than 300 people, including alumni, participants at Rutgers Day, humanities deans from the Big Ten, Academic Alliance, a bunch of diverse groups. And the most important part of this was that the students were able to engage in focus group processes where we invited community members, Rutgers community and New Brunswick community, to take an early version of the tour, offer feedback on what stood out to them, what made them uncomfortable, what was edifying, what was worthwhile. And I think this was a really incredible way to make students feel like they had a sense of involvement and ownership over how these histories are interpreted on campus. And perhaps most importantly, I think it's one of the ways, by offering these tours and material to incoming students, prospective students, it's a way to start fresh, where this will be the foundation of historical knowledge that young people have coming in. That the research from this project will actually shape how they understand the university, as opposed to just doing the kind of corrective work that this has meant for a lot of folks. So finally, in order to make the tours have the ability to reach broader audiences, I have some more images here of students who led the tours. These are all our undergraduate students from fall of 2017. And we then created a mobile app, which I have shared the link in the chat, to download from the Apple App Store or for Apple products, or from Google Play for Android products. And what what it contains is basically the pocket version of the digital archive, a pocket version of the book. We had undergraduate students working to synthesize, again, the material from the research and to highlight some of the things that we thought would be most salient for people visiting the campus for the first time or people hearing about this work locally in New Brunswick. And it has a virtual version of the historical walking tours, as well as some primary sources, which are also contained in the digital archive, resources for additional, learning opportunities, some mapping of all of the spaces that are talked about in Volume 1 of Scarlet and Black, including Halfpenny Town, the area of New Brunswick where most African Americans lived in the early 19th century, and some exhibits on relevant kind of contemporary topics through the lens of this research. So family separation, as well as colonization. There's all kinds of really incredible material here. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about visiting campus sometime soon and you'd like to engage with this material, you can download it for free and explore it on your own. And I don't want to talk too long, so I'll just make one final comment, which is that I think it's really incredible that the Scarlet and Black Project will have new life through the Institute for Global Racial Justice, because there's still so much outreach potential for these projects. And so one of the ways that we see that happening now, which Dan Swern mentioned yesterday in his comments in the first panel, is through community conversations that we are trying to instigate around spatial justice in New Brunswick and thinking about what it means that New Brunswick erected a statue to John Nielsen, the enslaver, in 2017. And what can be done to address the inequity that has created on our landscape in this city, and also thinking about the other ways that these legacies are represented on campus and through local history. And one of the ways that we've done that in partnership between the Public History Program and Scarlet and Black and the Zimmerly Art Museum is through this ongoing project called New Jersey Stories, New Perspectives on American Paintings in the Zimmerly Art Museum, where we've had, again, undergraduate and graduate students researching artworks, especially portraits of some of these early founders and trustees from Rutgers history, to interrogate, how these pieces of art came into existence in the first place and how they help us understand the stories that are shared in the research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Obrasil Kaufman. That's a lot of really great information to think about. I really enjoyed being a part of that kind of intergenerational oral history collection and love the way that you're thinking about kind of undergraduates participating in this project and getting invested in the community. We have so many questions coming into the Q&A, and I'm thinking of a kind of natural connection for the next question. So I see that there's a comment about using the KKK exhibit in class with students for Bryn, and kind of thinking about how important that research has been to kind of bringing students into this kind of untold narrative of white supremacy in the state of New Jersey. So, Bryn, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of your research on that and the significance of that history and situating it within the New Brunswick context.
Absolutely. Researching the KKK is always a bit tricky because technically it was a secret society. So finding precise details about things like who exactly was a member or what did their initiation rites look like is often elusive. So the sources that I had to work with were largely local New Brunswick newspapers, which initially really sort of treated the early evidence of the Klan in the city as a joke. And I think they never really quite took it as seriously as they should have. Even after, 10,000 people showed up to one Klan rally in the city. But I also worked with the Klan's own publications, which are still in existence. And in those publications, they would report the happenings of the local chapters across the country. So obviously, this is a source that has its own biases too. So as a scholar, you really have to look at these documents critically and always be assessing their biases. And although, I never really uncovered any evidence of physical violence that was committed by the New Brunswick Klan, but they absolutely did terrorize residents by making their presence known with these massive meetings and rallies, like I said, as well as numerous cross burnings throughout the city. And these crosses were set ablaze deliberately in Black communities. They were set ablaze on the Johnson & Johnson factory, where people would see them, where people would feel the terror. And, uncovering this history is really significant, as I think most people associate the Klan with Southern racism. But in fact, New Jersey alone had about 60,000 Klan members at this time. So New Brunswick is absolutely implicated in this terrorist activity that was going on. But, I think with the research, the thing that most people will take away is actually what the New Brunswick Klan actually called themselves, because each local group had an official name for their charter, and the New Brunswick branch of the KKK officially named themselves the Rutgers Klan. That was their name. But like I said, because we don't exactly know who the members were, we can't explicitly tie this group to Rutgers in any formal way. I can say that it doesn't seem like the university ever denounced them, but it does seem sort of most likely that this local Klan just sort of meant to name their group after the largest local institution, which was Rutgers. But like I mentioned in the book and in the exhibit, for most of New Brunswick's Black residents, the vast majority of whom had no dealings with Rutgers, the college, this undoubtedly created a terrifying association for them between just the name Rutgers and the KKK.
Thank you so much for that, Bren. And I'm thinking about this too as we kind of transition. We have time for 2 more questions, and I want to get to these 2 that are up here. And thinking about kind of the context of the KKK and then the existence of the AME Church, right? And these Black community spaces, and how significant they were. And so I'm going to take Dr. Boyd's question about what was, one of the most surprising things that we saw or you learned in processing this work, and processing the collections of Mount Zion, particularly within this context of the early 20th century, late 19th century. What was something surprising that you found, Ms. Saunders? And I can speak to that too before we take it to our last question.
Pamela, I do not understand a word you just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I just want to know, what was something surprising that you found in the processing and digging through the history room at the Archibald Library?
Surprising?
Something surprising or something you didn't expect in your kind of research of the Archibald history room.
I can't think of anything surprising that I don't understand what you're talking about. I really don't.
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you what was surprising to me. So I'll say that one thing that I thought was really important in the context of what Bren is speaking about was the fact that the church invested in opportunities for leisure and invested in opportunities within this context of racial terror to have these spaces for African Americans to get together. So in the late 19th century, I found records about Valentine's Day dances and social outings, all within the context of the AME Church. And so I think that's something that I knew that this kind of leisure existed, but it was really important, I think, to think about this within that chapter that we have in volume 2, to think about the ways in which African Americans within this context were creating spaces for enjoyment and pleasure, and that the Willing Workers Club had these opportunities to engage with one another in their own kind of Black community spaces. And so before we kind of close out our panel, because I think even thinking about Bren's discussion of kind of how Rutgers never disavowed the name Rutgers Klan associated with the university, and kind of thinking about the ways that we are developing community partnerships across the university and the community, Dr. Fernandez has offered this really important question really around accountability. How do cities, the cities where Rutgers campuses are located are in predominantly Black and Brown communities. So how can we keep Rutgers accountable to its surrounding communities today? And she's specifically speaking about the university's support of the closing and demolition of the Lincoln Annex, a school that has predominantly served Latino children in a district that is 90% Latino. And so I'm wondering too, if we can kind of close thinking about, community partnerships that hold the university accountable.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways that is the question, right? That is the question that is dictating all of the work that has gone into Scarlet and Black. That is the question that is, I think, guiding this panel. And I wish that I could give you some sort of answer that would just blow your mind and change everything and save the school. But I think, I think what history has shown us time and time again is that we have to just keep applying public pressure as a community, and make sure that we are informed, make sure that we know our history, make sure that we know our present. Ms. Saunders, you said something in your comments that I wrote down that I swear I'm going to embroider on a pillow. You said, every day is a new addition to history. So I think it's very easy for us who are historians to disassociate ourselves from the battles of the present because we are so consumed by what has happened in the past. But thank you for reminding, I think, all of us that what we do today matters. And the best thing that we can do is join as a community and express our feelings about what the university is doing right now, which is really pretty important.
Yeah, Dr. Obrasil Kaufman, would you like to speak on it, or?
I will just agree with those comments. I think that's really it. But there's one really tangible way. I think that's the best kind of overarching guiding goal we can have. There's one really tangible way in the short term that I think that we can address this, which is each of us as members of different categories of Rutgers communities to try to find opportunities, as Pamela said earlier, to leverage university resources in support of existing community initiatives, to not be the university who swoops in and says, we're going to do another extractive project. And instead, how can we help you build what you're already building? So I think if we can each find those kinds of opportunities, which Dr. Fernandez asked this question, she has been doing that with the Latino community in New Brunswick. I think that's a great way forward.
Absolutely. And I think, the local organizing that we as university members and community members, right, that we don't kind of exist separately, that we live and work and are a part of the community. And so I think the more we see ourselves as a part of the community, the more we work and organize with local institutions that have been here since 1826, like we've been doing with the AME Church, getting invested in other community partnerships, hearing and listening to what kind of folks who have been here longer than we have are speaking and the things that they're advocating for, and partnering with them. I think that's one way that we can kind of organize and keep pushing for public accountability from the university. And so I think with that, if there are no other comments, I think we will close this panel. It has been such a pleasure engaging with you all this morning or this midday. I really appreciate all of the rich conversation and ideas that you all are speaking about. And I look forward to the future of this project and the future work that we'll be doing as we kind of continue our partnerships with folks in the community. Thanks.